back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys! So I am here today to review 3 books which are the second, third and fourth in a series, and that is the Tidelord series by Jennifer Fallon. I've already reviewed the first one in the series, which is The Immortal Prince, so if you want to check out my review for that I will link it. But the second book in the series is called The Gods of Amarantha, and this one continues on where book 1 finishes. So what I liked about book number 2 and what I like about this series in general is that it is a fairly sort of stereotypical fantasy world. However, in this world we have characters who are immortal, and in the first book we meet a couple of them but not very many, and we get hints of others in the rest of the world. Now in this book we actually start to find out a lot more about the immortals themselves. We meet some of the characters who we've only heard discussion of before, and we really get to kind of see inside some of their mindsets. So this jumps around different characters' viewpoints. In the first book we are mostly focusing on Kyle, who is the immortal prince, and we're also focusing on Arkady, who is a duchess. And each of them has quite a lot of the story as their own in book number 1, and we get a lot of exposition. There's a lot of kind of telling stories to really give you the behind the scenes and introduce you to the world, and it does feel kind of wordy at times. However, I do like sort of long fantasies and I enjoy worlds where it's developed, so for me that works, although I know it won't for everyone. So book number 2 is actually a lot less wordy than book number 1. In what I mean by that is that some of these stories that we're told in book number 1 set up for events that happen later in the series, so we don't need to be told more stories about that. And in this one we follow not only Kyle and Arkady, we also get to know some of the other characters, as I say, who are immortal. We also follow the spy master, who's called Declan Hawkes, and some of the other characters who are part of a secret organisation called the Cabal. So in this world there are the immortals and then there are regular people, and the immortals are known as either just immortals or they're Tide Lords, and Tide Lords are people who have power over the tide, so they have kind of elemental magic. Arkady knows that Kyle is one of these people, or at least he claims he is, and we know from his stories that there are quite a few other Tide Lords on the planet of Amarantha at the moment. So our story continues by following Arkady and Kyle as they go off into different paths. Their paths kind of go apart from one another and they end up going on their own journeys, each of which takes them into contact with other immortals. We follow 2 different societies in this particular book. We have the Torlenians and then we have the people of Lebec and their capital city, which is Gleiben. They are vastly different societies, but we find out that both of these societies actually have immortals trying to vie for power and basically try and rule over them. The mortals who are there don't have any clue except for a select few who have kind of worked out what's going on a bit, but they don't really have any idea of the true scope of how long these immortals have been around and just how conniving and scheming they are. So book number 2 I really enjoyed. As I say, it upped the stakes a lot from book number 1. I think the intensity of this one was a lot more present, and I think the characters got developed a lot more as well, so we really got into the mindsets of some of the immortals and people who've lived for so many hundreds of thousands of years, and kind of found out a bit more about why they can be so brutal and terrible as they have been described to be. So I ended up giving this a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I definitely recommend the second one in the series. I then went on to the third one, and that one is called The Palace of Impossible Dreams. This one picks up at the end of book 2, so I don't want to go too much into spoiler territory, so I'll review this one fairly quickly. But what I do want to say about this is that it felt a little bit like it wasn't quite as good as book number 2, which was a shame. However, I think the reasoning for that is because it kind of sets up for book number 4 in the series, which is very dramatic and has a lot of really exciting moments. So book number 3 again is following mostly the immortals. We actually get to see a lot more of them in this one than either of the previous two, which I really enjoyed. And I feel like by this point in the series, you're really getting to know all of the characters, and we have a lot more characters that we're focusing on than in the first few books. It seems that every book in the series kind of gradually branches out more and more with characters, which I think works well because you're kind of introduced to them via other characters talking about them, and then gradually you get them kind of woven into your story as well. So I think it works, and I think all of the characters actually felt pretty developed and fleshed out. There are a lot of Tide Lords to keep track of, but I think each of them has their own distinct voice in the story, besides kind of some of the background ones who aren't Tide Lords or don't have an awful lot of political sway. Mostly they have quite distinct voices, and I think that really comes through in the actions that they take, the way that they react to other people kind of interfering with their plans and changing things. And I really enjoyed kind of getting to know a lot more about their motives and who they are and just what they were planning to do, because they have had so much time to plan that they could be doing anything and they could be anywhere in the world. So really interesting kind of intentions and motivations set up in this one, but I do feel like the action is a little bit lacking at times. And although we do see a kind of convergence of many of the immortals in this book, nothing really truly epic happens until the very ending, and then book number 4, where we go on to the ending itself. So book number 3, I ended up just giving a 3.5. I was also slightly disappointed in book number 3 that Arcady's story kind of took a bit of a Mary Sue dive, and she just became a kind of character who needed to be rescued a lot. She does stand on her own 2 feet at times, and I will say here that there are things like slavery and abuse and forced sex slavery and things like that in the book, so definitely not light-hearted, but if you can get past those things, then I do think it has some great merit. However, I think Arcady's storyline did annoy me at times because she started out so promising and then ended up in so many annoying situations that were not really her fault, but just men being horrible, that I was annoyed. So it would have been good to see her kind of get out of some of those situations on her own rather than having to be rescued every time by another guy. And there is a bit of a love triangle situation that's kind of set up in this one as well, which is also a bit annoying, but on the whole it wasn't too bad. The final one in the series is called The Chaos Crystal, and this is kind of the climax of everything. In this one we're seeing the characters as they search for the crystal, the Chaos Crystal, which is a pretty big deal. I'm not going to say an awful lot about what it does because I don't want to spoil anything, but basically the crux of the story is people are looking for it and there are big consequences if they find it for the world and for people themselves, immortal and mortal. So it's definitely a chaotic book, to say the least. It has a lot of drama. There are quite a few storylines that I was unsure whether or not Jennifer Fallon would be able to finish off, and I think she did, because the ending itself is quite different to what I thought it was going to be. It definitely surprised me, and I think I could see why some people might be irritated by the ending, but personally I found it fascinating to see what the author had done and how she finished it off and what she did to explain some of the questions I had throughout the book and kind of finish it all up in a very succinct and interesting way that leaves a lot of thought and pondering for the reader to do once they finish the book. So I really liked that, and I ended up really enjoying the series as a whole. Like I say, there are some pitfalls. Some of the female characters are not great, and some of the world building is a bit slow and a bit overly kind of wordy, but for me I did enjoy the series, and I do recommend the audiobooks if you want to pick it up, because that's quite a fun, easy way to get through them and to listen to them and just enjoy the stories. So I ended up giving the 4th one in the series and the final one in the series a 4 out of 5 stars, and I definitely recommend the series as a whole. So that is all of my thoughts on the final books in the series. Do let me know if you've read this or if you've read any other Jennifer Fallon works, because I've not read any of her others yet, and I'm intrigued about whether you think some of her other series are better or worse, or what you think of her. So do let me know. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon in my next video. Bye guys!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.